Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture in continuation with the series on Indian sociological tradition. In today's lecture, I am going to talk about M.N. Srinivas and his study of social change in post-independent India. In his understanding of the nature of change in post-independent India, starting with the constitutional provision, in this lecture, the focus is to understand how Srinivas looks into the process of nation building in post-independent India. So, nation building, as is understood, was the whole idea of building a united nation, keeping in mind the unity and diversity, and therefore a kind of a long and hard roadmap was to nation building has been undergone. He considers M.N. Srinivas describes it as old, diverse, and a stratified country, and therefore the task of nation building was a challenge. It was is also kind of very difficult because of the different way in which the diverse population of the country has responded, and therefore in terms of Srinivas considers the biggest hindrance to nation building in terms of the violent revolution which is going due to the whole idea of differences between caste in terms of access to resources and so on and so forth. So, the nation building as such implies building of a single entirety with parliamentary democracy, federalism and secularism, and the abolition of poverty and reduction of inequality. So, nation building in terms of a project was kind of an idea that India was a country with diverse caste, religion, region, differences. So, how could it be the unity could be maintained despite the diversity? And it was in the vision of the constitution, framers of the constitution, that India was declared as a democratic, federal and a secular country. And within, to keep up these ideals of the constitution, the idea of protective discrimination was kind of implemented, and the objective was to attain equality and a poverty-ridden society. However, this task of nation building or the effort of nation building is kind of a mixed response according to Srinivas, because in certain ways it has certainly achieved certain success. Because India is huge in size and diversity, and some of the problems which are part of the independent India has been continuing from the colonial rule. It's not something that has just erupted in post-independent India. It was some problems consisted over a period of time and continued into the new India. Therefore, to do away with these problems or provide solution to them was difficult. One of the success of nation building that Srinivas points out is the framing of the constitution is less than 30 months, taking into account political and cultural diversity. So, that is kind of considered as an achievement. The constitution was framed in a short span of time amidst ongoing violence between India and Pakistan. Declaration of India as a sovereign democratic country, giving all its citizens adult franchisee, protective discrimination for the weaker section to improve their conditions in post-independent India was kind of an achievement, where it was kind of seen as a nation that respected every citizen, and no kind of an identity was considered to be as victimizing, and therefore a number of communities or society that had been victimized because of the caste system, because of the way in which appropriation and exploitation was done, the attempt was made to do away with this, and the protective discrimination was passed. So, the second achievement of nation building outlined by Srinivas is the creation of political structure. So, by abolition of 565 princedom and the formation of linguistic states in November 1965. The third achievement is setting up of the National Planning Commission by Jawaharlal Nehru, and this body, that is the National Planning Commission, was a body which was to initiate the process of development, and this process of development was to be inclusive. It was going to be kind of take into account the problems of poverty and the eradication of poverty from the country. So, growth and then fourth achievement of nation in the project of nation building is growth and development in science, technology and education by setting up of Atomic Energy Commission. The second is University Grant Commission and national laboratories. Now, these public institutions were set up in order to ensure that India was able to progress on the lines of science and technology, and therefore a huge amount of public funding was done to ensure that the proper progress of society was made. Now, he looks into some of the factors for the success of nation building. The first factor that he consider as the success is in India, in post-independent India, we are aware there was already a large number of Indians who were already westernized, and they had the opportunity to go abroad, learn the Western lifestyle and culture, and they came back in India as social reformers and took up the task of reforming the society, and that can become a factor for success. The second factor for success was setting up of a parliamentary democracy and the principle of secularism, federalism and equality as enshrined in the constitution. The third factor which Srinivas points out is a very dominant role played by Mahatma Gandhi in the introduction of directive principles and finally the introduction of Panchayati Raj. The directive principle and Panchayati Raj actually makes us aware of two things in terms of the respect of individuals' rights, and second in terms of making the process of development as inclusive or rather decentralized. So, India today is kind of in completely inverted hierarchy of a social pyramid standing on its apex. That implies that the hierarchy, which was a ritual hierarchy, is not very kind of existence in term of occupational hierarchy, but yes, a certain different kind of a hierarchy has emerged, in which there is a kind of significance of those who have been able to attain benefit, social, economic and political benefit because of the constitutional provision. So, one important problem that he says is that though we have this provision which ensures that there is egalitarianism, that ensures that there is equality, but at the same time the path to equality is riddled with certain contradiction. And that is the problem of India's process of nation building. What are the contradictions? Well, first contradiction is equality versus preferential treatment. So, according to Srinivas, on one side there is the guarantee of equality, that there is no difference between the two individuals. This clashes with the ideology of preferential treatment, and what problem has it led to is that the OBC, the category of other backward castes, which Srinivas considers as heterogeneous, and because there is not one criteria on the basis of which it is labeled, so it leads to competition between dominant land owning caste and the artisan, servicing and laboring caste for scarce resources. So, what happens is again very significant is in terms of caste and economic factor kind of gets used with political power, and the benefit or the preferential treatment is not actually meted out to those who need it, but is appropriated by certain section who are already kind of well placed or doing equally well. So, that leads to a conflict. The second problem is that reservation, Srinivas says, has created a piggyback system. By a piggyback system, he says that those who have been able to take benefit become the back of the piggy for others to climb up. That is, that they say a certain member from one community has been able to take benefit and get a government employee, then he will be used to kind of be a reference point or a referral, and bribing other members of his community into the government job. That is what he means by piggyback system. So it would result in that only one or two particular community would go on again and again repetitively getting the benefits and denying the access to this resource to the actual beneficiary. Therefore, he is saying that this piggy bank system is the result of networking. India is kind of people in India do a lot of networking for getting a job, for getting admission into colleges, and for every work that one needs to do is through networking, corruption and bribery. This kind of challenges the prospect of preferential treatment to individual who actually needs the benefit. The third problem Srinivas points out is that the use of backwardness is a passport to certain benefits, and even those who are not entitled to them occasionally claim to be backward just because it is a shortcut to get jobs and admission. So the idea of backwardness is not necessarily everybody who is using the preferential treatment need not necessarily be the actual desiring those benefits, but one is it's an easy way out and it's a shortcut to ensure that you get a admission into a government institution or you get a public job, and therefore one would kind of prefer to use the label rather than kind of allow others to take benefit of it. Fourth problem is that there is refusal to give up the OBC identity despite improvement in economic and social status, and the tendency to continue reaping the benefit for generation after generation. So this is again kind of a vicious circle, and maybe because there is a very important contribution that Srinivas has done here in terms of pointing out to this problem that only a particular caste would take benefit of it and go on improving, and that is the reason why we now have the non-creamy layer within the OBC. So because this problem was been highlighted, there has been an effort to kind of now identify the people who have not actually benefited from it, and the policy is then diverted towards them. The fifth problem pointed out by Srinivas is that reservation has led to individual mobility at the cost of group mobility. So earlier the whole idea was that the Sanskritization or the entire question of caste mobility, the entire caste would move up, but in a contemporary society which is moving towards individualization, reservation is not necessarily that the entire community would move up. It is kind of an individual gets a job, kinds of leaves his family and community and takes up an urban job, and the understanding would be that he or she need not necessarily go back and do something for the community. So the mobility is only at the level of individual and not at the level of community or society. So when he looks into the problem or the project of nation building, he asks a very suitable question, and that is democracy suited to India? Srinivas is raising this question, looking into the around the kind of corruption, misuse, and the continuation of primordial ties, that he tries to question that, do you think because there is one section of society which is kind of continuing to be impoverished, not getting any benefit, are we still a democratic, supposed to be a democratic country? And he says that this persistence of poverty and equality, a section of the educated minority are of view that communism is to be regarded as a panacea to India's ill. But this is kind of a understanding which is coming from one section or one scholar. Srinivas would answer the either on another round. He says that democracy is valuable not because it is good and prestigious, but because it is information system in which needs and necessities of people are brought to notice of the administration. So he is saying that the idea of the constitution was kind of perfect. It was required for the nation like India to be a democratic country because there is sharing of information, there is freedom of speech, but the way in which it has used or the way in which certain section of people have kind of questioned the principles is problematic. The proper functioning of democracy requires the function of free and responsible press in the minimizing the abuse of power by its beholders. So the role of social media has been highlighted. Media in the sense of press, newspaper, and so on. But we know that even kind of it's a larger debate where we look into the media and whether media has kind of got politicized, and the news that the people at large are seeing or viewing, reading, are they actual genuine news or they are colored by political ideology. So it is important that media plays a kind of a neutral role. Second role that he considers as suitable for the maintenance of the principle of democracy is the role of Panchayati Raj. And he says Panchayati Raj is giving villagers experience of self-government and participation in democracy. It is decentralizing of power, where there is also a connect between the village and the say state level government organization and the center. So the whole idea of where he begins by talking about village not being isolated unit is also kind of possible, where we have this decentralization of power and we have a very strong Panchayati Raj which kind of looks into the problems at local level. Next, he is saying that regional identities as caste, religion and language and ethnicity are exploited to build vote bank and enter center stage of power. So this becomes problematic, and this is one of the most important problem that India is facing today, and that is that political parties are using the identity, the collective identity. They are making people more conscious about the religious and caste identity just for the sake of winning election. And so this results in intercaste, interlinguistic, inter-regional rivalries that has kind of increased over the years. Rather than these violence and conflict declining, it is further and further getting aggravated. When he looks into the whole idea of India as a nation, the task of nation building, he highlights that one most important role in the project of nation building was the role of science and technology and rural development. So there were large number of policies and programs which were framed with the passing of India becoming independent, with the task of taking science and technology to the villages, to the rural area, and one most kind of having an integrated rural development. So the National Planning Commission was set up in 1950 with Nehru as its chairman, and first 5 year was launched in 1952. This was kind for a overall holistic progressive development of the country. So when we look into science and technology and rural development, obviously it is very important to look into the role that Nehru had in terms of creating a vision for India. So Srinivas throws light on what was the idea of Nehru for creating a nation or a united nation. Because Jawaharlal Nehru was an individual who kind of had an exposure to the Western countries, and he was an advocate for the use of science and policy. Rather, he was for kind of a large scale use of science and technology for industrialization and development. So he kind of visioned India on the count of a progressive nation and the count of developed nation, and the only path or the road towards development was industrialization. He believed that industrialization could solve the problem of unemployment and poverty in India. So he wanted people to regard dams and factories as the new pilgrimage. And it is here that we look into the idea of secularization. The fact that there was an idea of building a secular nation, the stress was on more and more productivity. The stress was more and more on market and profit. So he was in kind of very close to the larger picture, overall global picture, and that was the picture of a neoliberal capitalist market, which was kind of focused on production and profitability. So when we look into science and technology, Srinivas does a kind of a historical mapping in terms of looking into the different decades and the progress that India has been able to achieve. So he says in 1950s, infrastructures of large scale development and large scale basic industries were set up, hydroelectricity projects. So this was just the starting of the giant task of building a progressive, modern, developed India. So a large number of public sector dams, industries, factories, hydroelectric projects were set up all over the country. 1960, the focus shifted to improve production through use of fertilizers and better irrigational facilities. So this was a time when we have this green revolution coming in terms of increasing productivity and rural output. 1970s, we see the change in the use of science and technology in rural development due to the changing political milieu in the country. So the 1970s, as I have already said, was a period where the politics kind of changes its nature, and it kind of becomes more in terms of caste, more in terms of identities, more in terms of religious, and therefore the focus kind of shift, and there is a kind of neglect of rural development. So the commitment and relevance became the watchdog for evaluating progress in rural development. A number of scientists were given the task of improving agrarian social structure. Because of that gap, because of the neglect, obviously the output or the productivity declined, and there was a large scale problem which was being faced. So there were several committees, several review done to ensure that how the problem could be solved. Now these task of bringing about a solution to the problem of degradation or stagnation in the rural area were given to these scientists, and the task was to ensure that the agrarian social structure would kind of be overhauled and lead to certain change. So what were the changes that we see in the rural and agrarian structure? And the first change that we see, that the number of land under cultivation was extended. So more and more land was put into agricultural purpose. Concessional land tenure such as the Jamindari system was abolished, and they provided security to tenure to ensure tenants and also affairs. So these were the land reform which was part of the post-independent India in order to ensure that rural India agrarian structure kind of did not stagnate and improve. However, when we look into the success, Srinivas notes that the implementation of these programs faltered. They were not able to be implemented in the true spirit, and as a result, the problem kind of persisted. One of the reasons why the problem persisted was that the leader of the landed caste, but generally people who had a huge amount of land, they were dominant in politics, and they were not very interested in allowing these policies and reforms to be implemented, because these policies and reforms would then kind of take away their dominant position. Land ceiling was mitigated by dividing land among close relatives. There have been occurrence of concealed tenancies and secret evictions. So as we see, the whole idea of problem, or the main problem that Srinivas points out while looking into the agrarian and rural reform, is also the question of implementation, and how there was a lack of will among those who were already in dominant position, political power, to kind of allow any kind of egalitarianism to come in. So Srinivas in his book is also giving us some of the reason for the failure of the rural development program. The first failure that he highlights is there was a lack of clarity in terms of what was so specific and unique to integrated development and how it was different from earlier programs of rural development. So, the program after program was being launched without any clarity, without any kind of an idea of why a program was being launched, even though there were a number of them existing at one point of time. And one of the factor that Srinivas points out very clearly is that these programs, policies were being made by individuals who had no connection with the rural area. So, it was being made by scientists, by bureaucrats who were not in touch with them, and therefore, these kind of problems in these policies and program. And also because there was no clarity, there was irresponsibility. So, the bucket would pass from one office to the other and nobody would take the responsibility of failure. So, overall the IRDP was not kind of very successful, and then here a very important concept has been used by Srinivas to understand the nature of social change, and that is the concept of cultural lag that is very important in sociology. The concept tells us that there is a gap between technological change and social cultural change. So, though technologies were coming in, high brand technology, science and was improving, but the mindset of the people were not changing. They were not ready to give up their cultural practices, which could be kind of contested in terms of whether it was good or not. So, while looking into the project of nation building, Srinivas also gives certain suggestions for improvement, and one suggestion that he gives us is translate the mantra to action, and that is a task for all social scientists. It is not only political parties or individuals, but all social scientists should be associated and people must participate in it. So, with the political will, a united nation could be possible. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.